we've been talking about this for a while. And turns out, Japan cEDH may have just broke the format. It's interesting because this does feel like a continuation of a trend, right? We've seen Rogthras sort of rise through the ranks in cEDH US side. But now Japan cEDH is doing something particularly interesting that we have kind of been advocating for a while, which is zero interaction.
Distraction makers.
So we're going to talk about the new emergent Japanese cEDH archetype called semiblue, and how it works, why it works, and whether or not this is cEDH's final form.
Semiblue is a 0 to low interaction.
So some of them play a couple counterspells.
Yes, that seems to be coming out from Japan. That emphasizes uncounterable creatures to win as soon as possible. And it's not always. Creatures is
uncounterable spells.
Uncounterable spells.
It's creature-based combos, uncounterable spells, effectively. And we'll talk about what those are. But the main play pattern to wrap your head around here is basically everything involving Gaia's Cradle. This land is completely busted, especially when you combine it with non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos.
Yeah. Wait, what was that card?
Non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
But basically you use non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos to untap Gaia's Cradle and then retap it for bajillions of mana and get to very expensive spells very quickly. Effectively, what you're trying to do with Gaia's Cradle, you need some amount of creatures in play, and then you're just trying to get into play things that untap it, tap it for tons of mana, and then cast a really bigger and bigger spells. You cast something drawing cards, you play more stuff with the mana that you're generating that untaps your lands and draws you more cards, and then you play more stuff drawing more cards. It's a very similar play pattern to this deck back in the day called Elf Ball that effectively does something quite similar, which is just sort of builds value on top of itself and is kind of a non-deterministic combo that just overwhelms your opponent with lots and lots of elves in play, and you just swing and win the game.
So this plays a lot of those like Cloud of Fairies, Peregrine Drake, Planeswalker, Kiora, Behemoth Beckoner.
Yeah. Yep.
Just even something like Snap that doesn't play any interaction whatsoever, but it plays Snap so that you can untap land.
Usually you're even bouncing your own stuff back to your hand with Snap to replay it again to untap your lands again. Yeah, so the big things that you are building towards to play is something like Ghalta, Stampede Tyrant to then put all of the rest of the creatures in your hand onto the board. Also, this interacts pretty well with Delightful Halfling. Is it Delightful or Delighted Halfling? Delighted Halfling, because it makes Ghalta uncounterable. You might also be ramping up to something like Last March of the Ints, which is a card that is also uncounterable just on the card. And then you're going to draw a bunch of cards and put a bunch of creatures into play. And then basically, one of the ways you win is you put a bunch of creatures into play and just attack with all those creatures for 120 damage and win the game. The other types of things that you're ramping towards are spells that give you effects on cast. So even if they're not uncounterable, you're still going to get additional things out of those spells, mainly Cascade or Storm spells. Apex Devastator, Maelstrom Wanderer are of particular note here, especially Maelstrom Wanderer because it gives all your creatures haste. So that's a good way to like fill up the board with stuff and then win the game with a bunch of hasty creatures.
It's assuming if you have a good portion of creatures or spells in your deck that are untapping some of your things, if you end up sort of ending up cascading into these creatures that are untapping your lands, that's then untapping your mana in order for you to go and play more stuff.
Just snowballing value into more value, basically. The other way that the decks tend to close out the game is combos with Kiki-jiki, so creature-based combos that are a bit harder to interact with in what people are playing as their interaction suites in cEDH, which mostly focus on countering instant and sorcery spells, or I guess just non-creatures generally. And the Kiki-jiki combo of note here, so you play Manamo as a land that can untap a legendary permanent, and then you're going to combo Kiki with a creature that untaps your lands, and suddenly with that 3-card combo, you can copy whatever's untapping your lands an infinite number of times and then win the game through those because they'll all have haste because of Kiki-jiki. And in that way, it's not playing those sort of traditional combo cards that would combo with Kiki-jiki, but that's because some of those cards individually are not contributing to what your game plan is in the same way that these untapped creatures are. Okay, so let's talk about why this archetype works so well.
what we talk about a lot is that investing resources to go and affect someone else's plans is just generally not a great idea. Because while you're investing resources to try and stop one other person from winning, you spent resources, they spent resources, and 2 other players did not spend resources. Meaning that you may be stopping that person from winning, but you're slowing your own progress, and you're not affecting the other 2 people, meaning they're more likely to win now.
And there's also just a huge opportunity cost to any card that you're putting in your deck, right? Let's say you're holding interaction in your hand. Well, that card could have been instead something that was pushing you towards winning the game, especially when you're ramping up to these things that are basically uncounterable, right? This deck is in the lineage of decks like Tron. So it's always been kind of a big mana ramp-esque strategy. Sometimes takes more controlling forms, sometimes takes more aggressive forms, but really the whole idea is that I'm skipping as many turns as possible to get to these really big, powerful, uncounterable, I win the game spells.
And the only reason that this really works in this way, because it's not like in standard 60-card format or whatever, where sometimes you'd have a combo deck or a mid-range deck, I suppose, where you'd have like interaction mixed with your game plan. But when you're going against one person, it makes a lot more sense that anything that you're going to be playing is going to interfere with their plan. So now you're just playing a game of trying to make sure that you're getting more value out of your disruption than they're getting value out of them trying to win the game, right? But if a 4-player game is what you're playing, we don't have the cards built for that, basically.
Right, and the dynamic that you're talking about is pretty interesting, right? It's like I can instead spend 2 mana on a counterspell to counter your thing that cost 4 mana, and there I'm getting a mana advantage, but I'm not getting a card advantage. But when we look at it in the totality of a 4-player game, I've spent 2 mana to counter your 4 mana thing, which brings me down a card, and you down a card, but the other 2 players at the table didn't do anything. This dynamic that we always refer back to is what we call guns versus butter. A nation can spend money investing in sort of their military or investing in their economy, but ultimately what you're left with is, well, if there's no incentive for me to interact with my opponents because I don't gain any advantage from doing so, well, then I should just completely focus on my own economy, my own butter, and just focus on ramping up as quickly as possible to get to these really powerful spells to win the game.
And the other way that this deck has ended up working too is that because it's so creature heavy, this is something I actually noticed when we were playing a game and you were playing Sephiroth. It's because your Sephiroth deck, I think, also leans a lot into these sort of creature combos.
Yeah, I was headed down this path with Sephiroth. It was one of my initial brainstorms for a cEDH deck as being something that's very creature combo heavy that is hard to interact with.
And I think it's funny because we were in a game and I think I was playing Kinnan and you were playing Sephiroth at the time. And anytime that you'd play a creature, I remember it was very difficult because a lot of our counter spells are usually geared towards non-creature spells or something like that. So there's a lot less available. So even if you are playing an interactive deck in a pod with someone that's playing this deck, the chances of you being able to go under people's counter spells is more likely if everything's focused on creatures. And once a creature's on the board, there's not much you can really do about it. Right, because no one usually plays any sort of like removal.
Yeah, like some cEDH decks are playing some bounce spells, or you play like Orcish Bowmasters or whatever. But anything that has a relatively high toughness, Orcish Bowmasters isn't really going to be able to deal with. And also the other thing to think about here too is that, in the cEDH meta, we have sort of this Rhystic Study dynamic where everybody's trying to play Rhystic Studies and copy Rhystic Studies and draw tons of cards to fill up their hands with plenty of interaction to fight off other people's interaction.
Guess what this deck doesn't do?
Does not care. Yeah. Never pays the 1. I guess you could theoretically pay the 1 because you're generating tons of mana anyway, but I don't really think there's any reason to, mostly, unless you're worried about maybe like a silence effect or something. But basically, you can just ramp, play a bunch of spells, let everybody draw a bunch of cards, and just win the game anyway.
Yeah, I think the thing that it's been really interesting seeing this deck not use some of these like traditional staples of cEDH, not using stuff like Rhystic Study.
Yeah, and these decks often will play Kinnan, but they don't play Basalt Monolith. And that comes back to that thing we were talking about before, where Basalt Monolith on its own, not particularly good. It's only really good with Kinnan. But Kinnan on its own, very good. So you're sort of left in this position where you're really analyzing every opportunity cost that a card costs you to put in your deck.
Right. This is kind of how I felt with the combo with Devoted Druid and
Machine God's Effigy
No.
or Hazel's Brewmaster?
Yeah, I like Machine God's Effigy because that at least has more versatility. It's Devoted Druid and Swift Reconfiguration.
Oh, sure.
It's because Swift Reconfiguration in your hand, it's like not a good card, you know? I think it maybe acts as like some pseudo removal or something, but it's just not a generally good card.
So I guess the last thing to talk about here is this it? Is this...
Have we reached the pinnacle?
Have we reached cEDH final form?
Maybe. It's a meta like any other meta. So what is a possibility to see is if this ends up becoming the meta and there's a whole lot of zero interaction at a pod, then what we might be able to see is a deck come through that would maybe normally be really bad if there's a high amount of interaction at the table that can stop it, but could be faster than all these other zero interaction decks on the pod. But it has to be faster.
Right.
And right now this deck is pretty fast.
This deck is real fast. I mean, we're presenting win attempts probably turn 2 or 3. So when you start looking at things that are faster, you might be looking at something like Rogsai, that might be trying to come under this with something like, just like a Thassa's Oracle Demonic Consultation combo or Underworld Breach combo lines, those kinds of things might be able to come work under this archetype, but really it's not that much faster. And so you start to look at well, how could a deck be even faster? And if we look towards the fastest decks in Legacy, we're looking at Oops All Spells, which can win on turn 0. It's crazy. Is it possible that there's a Oops All Spells deck that could emerge in cEDH? Yes. I don't know if it would be consistent enough because it's running 0 lands when you can run multiple copies of the MDFC cards that are, I don't know if they're all called MDFCs, whatever, the dual face.
Double face cards.
I think they're called modal.
Modal double face cards?
Yeah, they love the word modal for some reason.
Oh, Mark.
Mark. Yeah, it's a real...
He loves modal.
I think at a certain point, Oops All Spells could be a thing in cEDH, but the other thing that we could see is the most minimal amount of interaction that would stop some kind of combo like this. In terms of this deck, I think the points of interaction, you might think that you could interact with non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos, but there's a bunch of different ways to untap your Gaia's Cradle anyway. So non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos is pretty good, but it's not the end-all be-all of what you're trying to do. So even sort of stopping artifacts in that way or removing it somehow, probably not the best decision to try to... It was funny, I think... We made a video a while back that was talking about Bolt the Bird, right? The idea of if you have a lightning bolt, when should you use it on your opponent's Birds of Paradise, or when should you hit and bolt them in the face for 3 damage? And that's really a baseline heuristic of 1v1 competitive play. But that heuristic just does not work in Commander, and you should never bolt the bird. And so you
should never have a bolt,
right? But bolt is just talking about removal, right? So you should never destroy the non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos because it's effectively bolting the bird. You're supposed to try to deal with the thing that's actually winning the game. But if you're operating under that principle, the things that win the game from this strategy are very, very, very hard to interact with.
Yeah, I mean, and even then it still comes down to are you investing resources into interacting and stopping them and just making it easier for the other 2 people to win. I think we could also potentially, this is unlikely, but we could potentially see this evolving the meta in a way that, let's say if fogs become the new interaction, someone combos off Kiki-jiki, they make a bunch of Peregrine Drakes or Cloud of Fairies, and they try to swing, you fog.
And then you do it on your turn.
And then you could do it on your turn, and all their creatures are tapped, and that's a possibility. But all their creatures are gone.
If everybody's doing that, though, then the next person just combos off too and then just win.
Right.
So the next person better be you. So,
right.
I don't know.
And I think that it also is relying on the whole table having this type of deck, right? And suddenly if there's a deck that doesn't rely on combat damage, then a fog is going to be pretty useless. Right. Now, again, it depends on just how... invasive this meta is going to be. If it ends up just completely taking over, then we're going to be seeing probably stuff like Fogs or Everybody Lives or Angel's Grace, the stuff that's just going to completely thwart someone's turn. And then on top of that, maybe even potentially turn it around and maybe see some sort of, I doubt it, but maybe asymmetrical removal, stuff like Cyclonic Rift.
I think it's interesting, right? Because we can kind of look at the 2 sides of the spectrum here, and one is I'm going to try to draw a million cards and have interaction. And when everybody is playing that same thing, the game basically results in a stalemate, right? Theoretically, most optimal play, I think, under those circumstances, it's there will always be an answer to anybody trying to win, right? It turns into 3 versus 1 dynamics where the one player who is attempting to win is being stopped by the other players. But if all players are playing this style of game, it really is just whoever gets there first, right? It's just a race. Nobody's interacting. Yeah. The person who's in first seat is already substantially more likely to win than any of the other seats at the table, especially fourth seat. And so I think we just see that problem get worse. I don't know. This is a pickle.
I think
it's quite the pickle.
The biggest issue is going to be if this is it. And I think that's kind of what, if you're a cEDH player, that you should probably be on the lookout for and be concerned about. Because previously there was at least enough interaction where if you're playing the game, it still felt interesting, right? You still had to know when to interact, what lines of play to learn, and all that stuff. But if this becomes just zero interactivity, because that might just be what the game is incentivizing you to do, then it might end up being that your tournaments are going to be significantly worse because there won't even be an opportunity for you to politic if there's no interaction
there's
whatsoever.
No reason to politic.
Yeah. And so even the people that really like cEDH and want to keep that sort of spirit of the format by politicking, it won't matter because there's nothing for you to politic. Yeah. So this might be it. I don't know.
It's possible. Yeah. I mean, I don't want us to act like we know everything, right? Because it's very possible that this fizzles out somehow. Maybe there's some kind of tech or Wizards print something that stops this from happening. But this is, in our analysis, where the systems point.
I mean, it's funny because, we've talked about it a fair amount. This is generally where the systems want to lead players towards. But it doesn't mean that, there can't be mechanics printed to subvert this. Yeah. But that's up for Wizards to actually then pay attention to this format and ideally try to design something around that issue.
Well, and it's also really difficult because their hands are tied a bit because they're serving a lot of masters, right? Like they're not just focused on making sure that Commander, in this case cEDH, is the best competitive format that it can possibly be, right? They still have to account for standard and modern and all these other formats. So even printing some kind of a card that would balance this all out could become difficult. I guess if you're saying, if there's a clause on the card that's like all opponents, something like that might help. But I don't know, like if you're trying to hit like all permanents of all opponents at a rate that would be playable before, like let's just talk about Cyclonic Rift for just a second.
Yeah, it'd probably have to be a card like that. Yeah.
You get up to 7 mana and you're playing Cyclonic Rift. Why aren't you just winning the game, right? That's kind of what this deck is already saying, is what's the point of getting to 7 mana if it doesn't just win me the game?
Well, and because if you were holding Cyclonic Rift too, that could have been the card that would have put you ahead of the other players, but instead you're holding the Cyclonic Rift. So it again is that opportunity cost.
I guess what's weird is what could they possibly print that would stop this? You know what I'm saying? Like how good would the interaction need to be to make it worth playing?
Yeah.
Like when you only get 1 out of every 4 turns.
This is where I actually think that they, at this point, have pushed the power level so far that I think existing within their current system constraints is not going to work for them. And I think they could look to games that have gone beyond the levels of their system and have subverted their system and see what they've done, which means they should look at Yu-Gi-Oh!
Yeah.
And what Yu-Gi-Oh!
We've
did.
talked about this.
Yeah. No, I think that the costs for these cards just have to come from someplace else.
Sure. Right.
And so it either has to be...
That mana has become too easy. Right, it's that the thing that's supposed to be solving the queen problem is no longer solving it, so you can just play whatever you want. Mana is basically irrelevant in these decks, so you can go all the way up to the things that are supposed to be game enders, but you get to play it on turn 2 or whatever.
More than likely, it's probably going to have to be that they buff interaction, basically. Yeah. You have to, and that interaction, if the strongest interaction, stuff like Force of Will, stuff like maybe not Fierce Guardianship anymore because you need a commander. It's Force of Will, Pact of Negation, stuff like that. If that's not working,
I got it.
You need to go even more.
I got it.
Okay.
You need a commander, a partner commander. So it's in the command zone alongside another commander, because otherwise it's too big of an opportunity cost. That is a counter spell that exiles the spell on this deck.
They already have a commander that exile or counters a spell.
Yeah, but it just counters it. I think there's one that bounces the spell back to their hand. I know Venser does that, but isn't there that blue-black commander that I don't remember if it bounces the spell or not?
I thought he counters it.
He might just counter it. If he just counters it, that's not good enough. Also, this is just bad. I don't know.
If you enjoyed listening to us talk about non-game changer Candelabra of Tawnos, please feel free to give us a little like and a subscribe, maybe a comment down below.
If you want to join our Discord, you can find the link in the description. Thanks for watching. We will see you next time. Bye.